Hello and welcome to Unacademy. I welcome you all to the first World War session, one shot, meaning everything you need to know about the First World War. We will cover in this video. In the next 2.5 hours, we'll discuss the causes, the course, and everything related to it. So good evening to all of you. A very interesting discussion in front of you. But before we begin, a very important announcement that the 50% off plus 12 plus 12 9 plus 9 or 18 plus 18 offer has been extended till 23rd of December, and you have to use the code IAS English. If you use this code, the backend team will be able to attribute you to our team, and therefore you will be able to get mentorship sessions from our team before you join Unacademy. So therefore use the code IAS English to join. This is the right time. There has never been an offer where we get 9 plus 9, 12 plus 12 or 18 plus 18. Use this offer to join our family. If you ever found UPSC very difficult, this is the time to join our course and make it your dream. So use the code IAS English. I cannot emphasize this enough because this will allow the backend team to attribute you to the English batch and therefore get mentorship sessions from us. Now, the way we go about this is that first, you need to understand what is the purpose of world history in UPSC generally. Because there's a lot of myth and a lot of problems which students develop because of that itself. Then I will discuss with you the structure, the way I'm going to cover the whole video and the whole what we call as cause and the course of the First World War. And we'll also end by doing the Treaty of Versailles and the consequences for the war itself. So I hope my audio video is clear, and good evening to all of you. And you're excited that ways for this session. Now, the first thing which you need to know is that world history is for mains, meaning it is a mains specific part of UPSC, and therefore in your GS paper 1 you can expect questions related to world history. Now that means that here factual knowledge basically goes out of the picture. And what is expected from you is concepts and descriptive knowledge. If you know this, then half of your problems are sorted, because when we talk about concepts and descriptive understanding, that is easier because you have to understand the event rather than learn the names of people actually associated with most of these events in that regard. So the first thing which you should know is concepts, descriptive. Therefore, whatever I'm discussing in the next 2 hours, the finer details really don't matter, but the larger picture matters. When you understand the larger picture, that will allow you to understand the event, the consequence, and in most cases, all the questions in world history more or less revolve around cause, course, or significance, or impact. This is the 3 metrics or pillars on which world history actually works, in most cases post-independence also. Because you have to write 150 to 250 word answers, in most cases the course goes out of the picture, because nobody can write the whole of the First and Second World War in 150 or 250 words. That is not possible. But when we talk about the cause and significance and impact, it is extremely important, because from the causes of the French Revolution to the causes of the American Revolution to the causes of the First World War to the impact of the French Revolution to the impact of the American Revolution to the significance and impact of the First World War, these are standard questions which you can expect. So this was the first thing I wanted to establish, which is that the purpose of this discussion is not to go into each and every, you can say, Serbian crisis and then understanding the leaders who are involved in it. Rather, the Serbian crisis in the larger context. Now, what is the structure of this lecture? If anybody asks you, why did the First World War happen? What is the answer which you will give? I'm looking at the comment section. Tell me, why did the First World War happen? There's a standard answer which is going to come from most of you, and if not you, from most of the aspirants, and that is related to what is called as the Sarajevo crisis. People talk about the Sarajevo crisis, which is when the Archduke for France Ferdinand was shot by Gavrilo Princip a Serbian shot an Austrian, and as Yash said, exactly the assassination of Archduke of Austria. That is a standard answer you will find online also, in most of the sources also. But in order to understand Sarajevo crisis, we have to go back. Meaning, if you understand Sarajevo crisis, the death of Franz Ferdinand as the only reason, then you will never understand the larger context of why First World War happened. Therefore, we have to start not in the 1900s, but in the 1800s. And this is where the first part of the discussion is going to be related to what is called as the Eastern question. Because if you understand the Eastern question, which is the question related to the Ottoman Empire, you will be able to understand multiple tendencies. From the Eastern question, we will discuss 6 to 7 tendencies which will develop in Europe, which will then explain to us what happened in 1914 that in turn led to a war at the scale of the world, which is the First World War. Meaning, you cannot understand the First World War causes if you don't understand what is Serbian War of Independence, Greek War of Independence. So therefore, we'll start at Eastern Crisis. Then we'll talk about Serbian War of Independence, Greek War of Independence, the Crimean War, thereafter the Great Eastern Crisis, Congress of Berlin, 1878, Alliance Systems of 1900, then Moroccan Crisis, the what we call as Britain-Russia Alliance, thereafter go into the Bosnian Crisis, then the First Balkan War, Second Balkan War, and then into the Sarajevo crisis. This is basically the tapestry which we will cover. Once we've covered the causes, I'll consolidate everything for you in 2 to 3 slides, and then we will move to the what we call as the course of the First World War. How did the course, or how did the First World War go from 1914, 15, 16, 17, 18? We'll discuss each of these years, what happened, and then we will discuss 1919 Treaty of Versailles and end the session. This is basically what is in front of you for the next 2 hours, a whole tapestry of issues which we'll understand from 1800 onwards till 1919. So we'll cover 119 years, and in that we will try to understand everything related to the First World War. So is everybody ready? Can we begin this session? Yes? I want everybody's answer here. You understand the basics of how you're going to go about it? Yes, sir? Great, sir. Okay, from time to time, I'm going to ask you that, are you following? We will try to be on the same page with regards to it. It's a lot of different, what we call as events. We'll try to understand it. Okay. Now, the first thing which you need to understand is this map, which is the geography in which we are actually operating in. This is a map of Europe between 1700 to 1800. Now, there are multiple things which you need to understand here. First, I'll mark it in red. There is something called the Ottoman Empire. This empire is one of the focus for us, and we'll talk about it spanning over 3 different continents. But let's go to continental Europe, and what are the power dynamics here is important. You have standard Britain, an important great power as they were called. Then they have France, Spain, Portugal. This doesn't change. But then you will see multiple what we call as smaller kingdoms which don't exist today. This is the Russian Empire. This was an area which was off and out part of the Russian Empire, which is modern day Poland or the Polish nationality. But more or less, it was believed that Russia controlled this by hook or crook, the Russian Empire. And then we have something called the Austrian Empire here. The green color which you see here, this is all called the Austrian Empire, a very important entity in our story. And this is what you have to understand. This is called the Austrian Empire. Then there was something called Prussia here. And the most evident omissions is that there is no Germany and there's no Italy, because Germany and Italy were created through the process of unification under Bismarck and Cavour, and that will only happen by 1871. So it is only by the end of the 19th century that Italy and Germany, also called as of right now, called the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire is basically holding all the German-speaking states. There's nothing holy about this empire, just that the Pope had given sanction to the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. That is what is called Holy Roman Empire, or the concept of Holy Roman Catholic Empire. That is the idea here. So when we look at this geography, we have 5 to 6 important players. When we talk about great powers, I will basically be referring to Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, Russia, and Austrian Empire. Prussia, equally important player in this story, but that ways it will be embroiled in the process of unification of Germany. And the Ottoman Empire is the main focus. Our Eastern question starts from here. So this is the map of, and the map of Europe changed multiple times. This is the first map of Europe which you have to understand between the 18th century, which is 1700 to 1800. I hope that you can place Austrian Empire. I'll keep on referring to these maps. I'll try to make it as visual as possible so that you understand the whole concept. Now, if we understand this, let's concentrate on the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire spanned over 3 different continents at this given point of time. There were 3 basic sections of the Ottoman Empire. After its rise in the 1300s, it precedes the Mughals, but when the Mughals rise in India, the 3 gunpowder dynasties which are called, which is Mughals, Safavids, and the Ottomans. But 1300 is a very important period when the Ottomans start to rise, and over the next 200 years they are able to expand into 3 different continents. So we have one, the European sector, and the second one was in the African sector, and thereafter one in the Asian sector. Now, when we talk about these 3 sectors, our main focus is towards the European sector, which is how did the European sector actually look? Now, why do I say that the Ottomans are important? Because the Ottomans solved multiple issues for the what we call as Western European countries, because the Ottomans are holding a very diverse section. And at the height of their power in 1453, 1454, when the fall of Constantinople happens, they control the Black Sea, they more or less control the Mediterranean Sea, and they more or less control the Aegean Sea. And therefore, if you have to operate in the Mediterranean Sea itself, it is very, very important that the Ottomans are either pro, or you have to steer clear of the Ottomans. This was one of the reasons why they were looking for a sea route to India, because the Ottomans blocked the land route to India during this period. Now, once the Ottomans started to expand, they control a very sensitive sector. And that sensitive sector is the Balkan region. This is the modern day map of Balkans. Based on the Balkan, what we call as range itself, the Balkan sector is very, very critical. It is critical because it has a lot of nationalities. It has a lot of what we call as ethnicities. And once you take into consideration the ethnicities itself, you will then understand how the Balkans basically become like a dividing line between the Asian sector and the European sector. Why do I say that? See, the Ottomans are an Islamic caliphate. Now, this line which you see here, basically became a de facto line between the Christian world and the Islamic world. And therefore, with the Islamic world and the Christian world being divided by the Ottomans were ruling over multiple Christians, which were in a way the ethnic minorities of the Ottoman Empire. Now, when we talk about these ethnicities, this is where the Eastern question comes through. What I've established till this point is that this is the map of Europe, and within this map of Europe, you have an entity called the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire holds Eastern European sector. Eastern European sector is very, very diverse. if you talk about the nationalities which are there within the Ottoman Empire in the Eastern European sector, you have Turks, you have Serbs, you have Bulgarians, Romanians, Greeks, Hungarians, and most of them are called Slavs. Slavs is their race, which is they're very close to the Russians when it comes to their racial identity. They are Slavs. However, ethnicity, which is culturally, they're very different. A Romanian is very different from a Bulgarian, is very different from a Greek, is very different from the what we call as Serbians. Now, this sector is very ethnically diverse, but this sector is equally critical, meaning it is very, very important for any movement in the Arabian Sea to be controlled via the Balkans. If Balkans become very, you can say, becomes very fragile, that in turn has a cascading effect on the Mediterranean Sea itself. Now, when it comes to the Ottomans, they followed a very peculiar policy. And that peculiar policy was, within this sector, they never tried to push what is called as Ottoman culture, which is called non-Ottomanization. Non-Ottomanization means that though they were Bulgarians, Serbians, and Romanians, they never tried to convert them in mass into Islam, and they never wanted to capture them culturally. Therefore, these sectors, though part of the Ottoman Empire, were very, ethnically diverse, and they were never made into Islamic cultural understanding. This is where the Ottoman Empire now becomes like a ticking time bomb. See, when the Ottoman Empire, when it is at the height of its power, then the Balkan sector is under the Ottomans. It has a lot of ethnicities. Those have never been converted to Islam. They are non-Ottomanized. Therefore, they hold their own culture, their language, their dressing sense and food. However, once the Ottomans start to become more and more powerful, they also push them down. When they push them down, what happens is that they basically become ethnic minorities. And when they become ethnic minorities, there is a lot of chance that these ethnic minorities over a period of time could become a problem. Now, let's be very honest. And I'm going to ask you this question. If it came to the great powers, would they not have captured this Christian sector back? Yes or no? Please tell me. That if they wanted, they could have easily severed the Islamic world from the Christian world, and they would have taken this sector very easily. Which is that if it came to Britain, France, Russia, or Spain, or Portugal, they could have easily taken this sector back, right? Because they are great powers, they have power which is multifold in that regard, easily taken it back. But the question is, then why did they not do that? Why did they not take the Ottoman sector, which is Eastern European sector? And this is wherein lies the fragile balance which the Ottomans hold. See, Ottomans hold the Balkan sector, very ethnically diverse. And in the era of the French Revolution, in the era of the American Revolution, in the era of nationalism, an ethnically diverse sector is very dangerous. Because once they will basically get influenced by nationalism, they will start to ask for countries or nationalities or their own independent nations. Further, because this area is Christian, this area is Islamic, and this area is Christian, the Ottomans were basically like a buffer state. This whole sector was a buffer between the Islamic world and the Christian world. Therefore, imagine it like this, that the great powers have this bomb called the Balkan sector. And Balkan sector is explosive because it has too many ethnicities. This bomb was very conveniently given to the Ottomans. Hold it. We are happy that you're holding it. We have nothing to gain by taking this sector. Rather, we'll be happy that you hold this sector, and therefore we have peace vis-a-vis in religion, Islam and Christianity. And we also know that you're not in a way imposing Islam on them. Therefore, it is non-Ottomanization, and you are treating them as second-grade citizens. That is acceptable to us, but at least none of us has to answer to this area. None of us has to basically deal with this area. So it was a very convenient solution which all these European powers wanted, which is let the Ottomans hold the Balkan sector, because via holding the Balkan sector, it will be very easy for them to keep a distance away from the Islamic world. Therefore, there was a convenience in this concept. The great powers, if they wanted, they would have taken this sector very quickly. But giving the Ottomans power in this area, or allowing them to hold this area, in a way, is both win-win situation. Ottomans hold a very major chunk of Eastern European sector and the Black Sea is totally under them. On the other hand, the great powers don't have to deal with these ethnicities, and at the same point of time, they also have to just stay away from any form of religious conflict. So I hope that you understand this win-win situation, because this is where the Eastern question actually arises. Do we understand this win-win situation, this convenience which exists within this whole concept itself? The Ottomans deal with the Eastern European sector. The West does not have to do anything about it. They can easily stay where they are, and therefore they can easily hold this sector away from religious conflict. Perfect. Now, the problem starts to rise after the Ottomans start to become weak. Though they have not allowed nationalism to rise, once the Ottomans start to decline, and the decline starts from 16th century onwards and becomes extremely pronounced in the 17th century. And therefore, there is a very important acronym which is used for the Ottomans, which is they were becoming what is called as the sick man of Europe. The sick man of Europe, because of its ethnic diversity, because of its poor military conditions, because of its fiscal and economic crisis, the Russians were already and the Austrians were already taking multiple sectors. They tried to invade Italy, but Italy was something which they were not able to take. And thereafter, there's a very strong, steady decline in the Ottomans which was happening. And there is a problem with the central authority declining. Therefore, there will be a chance that the Balkan sector becomes loose. And this is where there arises a question, and that is called the Eastern question. See, with corruption, with weak central power, with no real international, you can say, attention towards the Ottomans, and with provincial governors becoming more and more powerful, with no assimilation of minorities, Ottomans were going to decline for sure. That was a given by the end of 17th century. By 1600, 1650, 1700, it was clear that the Ottomans are going to decline. They are not the same Ottomans of the 1500s, 1550s, and therefore the Balkan sector will go down for sure, in a way into a problematic crisis. And this is where the genesis of the First World War needs to be seen. I'm taking you back to 1800 to understand something which happened in the 1914s. Because if you don't understand the Eastern question, you will not understand why was Serbia the way it was. Therefore, now there arises a very interesting question. And that question is, if and when the Ottomans will decline, what will happen to Southeastern Europe? See, with French Revolution, the nationalism in Europe was rising. Political nationalism, cultural nationalism. We will see nationalism in Germany and Italy also rising. And between 1800, 1850, Germany was becoming more and more conscious of its cultural identity. Italy was becoming more and more conscious of the cultural identity. And therefore, it is very, very clear that with French Revolution, with American Revolution, economic and political nationalism in space, there was a threat of collapse of the Ottomans for sure. Now, this is the question which comes through. Now, the Ottomans were holding in Europe that bomb, which is called the Balkan sector. Now, the question was, once the Ottomans die, who holds this sector and what is the way we manage this Eastern crisis? So, therefore, the Eastern question is nothing but the concept of Eastern crisis, which is with the Ottomans steadily declining, who will hold the Balkan sector is the question. And with the Balkan sector being so explosive ethnically, or you can say culturally, there was a major question which came up. Now, do we understand what is the Eastern question? Because then I will tell you how did each of these powers, great powers, wanted to answer this question. And therein lies the genesis of the First World War. Do we understand what is the Eastern question? If and when the Ottomans are going to decline, what will happen to Southeastern Europe? If we understand this question and the genesis being in the Ottomans and the steady decline which we saw during the 16th and 17th century, we are now ready to, in a way, pivot towards a very important section, which is the way great powers wanted to in a way answer this Eastern question. We understand it? There's nothing. Okay, perfect. Now, each of these powers have a vested interest. Each of these powers have a vested interest. One is Russia, the other one is France, then Britain, and then the Habsburgian or the Austrian Empire. See, Ottomans are declining. Now, Russians have a vested interest in letting that happen. And the reason is because Russia, because of its geography, has a very big issue. They don't have an all-weather port towards the Atlantic. The only port which they have is St. Petersburg. But because the Baltic Sea freezes in the, you can say, winter season, they do not have anything as a port which could help them enter the Atlantic. And the other one is on the other side of the world itself, Vladivostok, but it is in the Pacific. And therefore, their only good port was called Sevastopol. And when we talk about Sevastopol, Sevastopol is in the Black Sea. And if you want to enter from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean, you have to cross this strait which is called Dardanelles. Now, Dardanelles Strait is basically controlled by the Ottomans. This strait is controlled by the Ottomans. Now, therefore, if the Russians want to enter into the Mediterranean Sea, they have to go through the Dardanelles Strait and therefore Ottoman territory. So now tell me, would it not be in the interest of the Russians that this sector goes out of the hand of the Ottomans, which in turn leads to Russia to expand into this sector? Because that allows them in turn to hold the Dardanelles and their only entry point into the Aegean Sea and therefore into the Mediterranean Sea. So the idea is that Russia, and let's try to map this. Russia wants the Ottomans to decline. Ottomans to decline, which in turn allows them to hold Eastern Europe. And because Russians are Slavs, therefore this Slavic sector would automatically have an affinity towards the Russians. So Eastern European would come under them, therefore they would be able to control the Dardanelles Strait. And therefore their only access to the Atlantic all weather would now be secure. Now, if we talk about the British, if we talk about the French, they have a rivalry with Russia, which is that they don't want the Russians to have access to the Mediterranean Sea. And therefore, France, Britain and Austria does not want this sector to be destabilized because it has a border with this sector. If there are too many revolutions which are happening in this sector, it would impact the Austrians. On the other hand, France and Great Britain does not want this sector to go out of the hands of the Ottomans because that gives Russia access to this sector. And therefore, Austria, France and Britain, all three don't want the Ottomans to decline. Don't want the Ottomans to decline. And with regards to that, their reason is because that allows them to balance Russia. Russia's advantage is a disadvantage to these three powers. Austrian Empire does not want this whole sector to be destabilized. So the question is, Russia is at a disadvantage. So therefore, we don't want Russians to therefore get access to the Mediterranean. So we will balance Russia. And this is where this whole question, the Eastern question, will get complicated. I'll tell you the reason, because now there's a dilemma. And the dilemma is, if we allow the minorities independence under the concept of nationalism, we destabilize this sector and therefore we destabilize the Mediterranean Sea. If we keep the Ottomans extremely powerful, they will then do atrocities on the Orthodox Christians, and that would be a threat to the Austrian Empire itself. So therefore, now there are two vested interests in the world. One of Russia to let the Ottomans die or the sick man die, and on the other hand, you have Britain, France and Austria who don't want the Ottomans to die. This is a very standard filmy type situation in which Ottomans are on the bed, they are on the ventilator. Russia wants to pull the cord because it gains too much by Ottomans to die. On the other hand, the British, French and the Austrians don't want the Ottomans to die because Russia will gain too much. So they want to keep Ottomans as much as healthy as possible to hold this sector, but not too healthy that they become a threat to the British and the French itself, and they should be able to balance Russia. This is called the power politics of the 19th century. The 19th century power politics is very messy. So at the turn of 1800, we have multiple things which are happening. Ottomans are declining. Nationalism is spreading through the Balkan sector. Britain and France want to balance Russia. Thereafter, Russia wants Ottomans to decline. Austria does not want this area to become destabilized. And therefore, it's a proper power, you can say, meddling and diplomatic crisis because there are too many interests intertwined together. And from this point forward, the Europeans will mess up the Eastern question, which will in turn lead to the First World War. So, when we talk about the road to the First World War, the road to the First World War lies in the Eastern question. Now, what I will do is, I'll try to summarize the first section. The first section is over, then we'll go into the road to the First World. What we've understood till this point is that the Europe of 1700-1800 was messy. No Germany, no Italy, but too many powers called the great powers have all vested interest to balance one another. The Ottomans are holding a very explosive sector. When they are powerful, nobody cares about that sector because that is a problematic sector nobody wants to deal with. However, by the turn of 17th century, once the Ottomans start to decline, there is an important question which is in front of the Western European countries. What to do with the Ottomans? And when we talk about what to do with the Ottomans, now there are vested interests in play. Russians want the Ottomans to decline. Everyone else wants the Ottomans to be there so that Dardanelles Strait does not go into the hands of Russia. And therefore, the Eastern question has a very messy answer, which is let's keep the Ottomans alive, but let's keep nationalism also alive. Let's balance Russia and keep this area destabilized so that nobody gains nothing, Russia gains nothing itself. Why is it buffering? Nothing on the screen. Okay. Okay. Fine. Everything. Now clear. Now it's fine. Perfect. Okay. So we have established the Eastern question. Now we'll move on to the next section, which is road to the First World War. Now, in order to understand road to the First World War, you have to understand the following events. One is called the Serbian Revolution or the Serbian War of Independence. Thereafter, we have something called the Greek War of Independence or the Greek Freedom Struggle. Then we have something called the Crimean War. Then the Great Eastern Crisis. And in the end, we'll understand the 6 tendencies which are prevalent in Europe, which will explain to you the First World War itself. Now, let's systematically cover each. Now, do understand one thing. Who held Eastern European sector? Ottomans. Ottomans, by the turn of 19th century, 1800, the Ottomans hold it. Too many internal problems. However, 1800, Ottomans still have the power to hold on to this sector, but now the crisis will start. And Serbia is going to be the first such concept. Okay. So, in this Ottoman sector, there is a certain sector here, and this area is called Serbia, dominated by Serbian nationals or ethnicity. Now 1804, the Serbians, after getting influenced by the Austrians, after getting influenced by the French, now start to assert their identity. They try to assert their identity, which is that they want independence vis-a-vis the Ottomans. Now, this event itself is not important, but if I will look Serbian War of Independence and Greek War of Independence in a comparative perspective, you will realize that there will be a very interesting tendency which will develop. Now, Serbians want independence in 1804. They will fight for their independence. They had militarized themselves, and for close to 2 decades, they will fight for their independence. But a very important point in that struggle was no great power got involved. Meaning, the Serbians even said to the Russians that help us get independence because we are also Slavs, but the Russians did not help. Neither did the French help, neither did the English help. Nobody came to the rescue of Serbia. Serbia fought alone in its own revolution to get independence. And what is the irony of the story is, when Serbia will get independence also by 1817, it will not be recognized. Nobody is going to recognize it. They will fight for first 10 years, then they will have a decade of independence, then the Ottomans will again capture the Serbian sector, then again the Serbians will fight, and finally Serbia will become virtually an independent zone in this sector, but its independence will not be recognized. Meaning, by 1817, Serbia was virtually independent, but not recognized by anybody. Now, the basic moral of the story here is that Serbian nationalism, when we talk about Serbian nationalism, it is based on the concept of self-independence, but no great power gave assistance. And this is where these Serbian nationals in a way felt betrayed also. But the reason for that is Serbs are not important in the larger European story. Serbs are just one nationality which occupy this sector. They are not important for Europe. Therefore, nobody really came for their assistance. Now, this is an important point once I add the Greek story. When we talk about the Greek War of Independence, which will happen in the same period, see, the Greeks hold a very important sector. This whole sector is the Greek sector. Now, Greeks generally have been a very important nationality across Europe. Meaning, when the Ottomans even captured this sector, Greeks were given administrative position within the Ottoman Empire. Most of the captains and the what we call as explorers and their, you can say, crew were Greek. So Greeks are scattered across Europe. There is a substantial population of Greeks in Britain, a substantial population of Greeks in France, there is a substantial population of Greeks in Austria also. And the idea was they were very important mercantile group. And therefore, their position is exactly opposite to the Serbs. While the Serbs were nothing to nobody, on the other hand, the Greeks were very, very important to the European sector. Now, much like the Serbs, the Greeks also wanted independence. But the Greeks were never able to do it themselves. This is the very important point you need to note. The Serbs were able to fight for themselves and were able to also get virtual independence after 1870. On the other hand, the Greeks were not able to do that. And the reason for that was the Ottomans were much more keen to hold to the Aegean Sea sector, and whilst they had a proper national movement because of the Greek governors becoming more and more independent, there was a proper body which is called the Fiki Erythrea. FICI Eritrea was a body which came into existence, the Society of Friends, which was going to help the Greeks get independence. And because of the Serbian nationalism which was there at this point of time, Greeks were also supercharged. So Greeks were supercharged, they wanted independence. But the point is, after 1821, n number of times the Greeks fought. But every time the Ottomans were able to crush the Greeks. So one thing was very clear by the turn of 1823-24, that the Greeks will never be able to get independence on their own. Whilst the Serbians were able to do that, Greeks were never able to get independence. That was clear. And this is where there rises a very interesting tendency. Now, in this concept, Russia finds an opportunity. And that opportunity is that if the Greeks become pro-Russia, it will allow them to have more say in the Aegean Sea. And this is where, against all what we call as previous diplomatic understanding and great power politics, the Russians will intervene. And the Russians will say, we will give you independence, O Greece, you don't need to worry. And this is where a great power got involved in the internal politics of the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire and the Greeks were fighting, but now the Russians say, we will give you assistance and give you independence. And this is where the Greeks will now get assistance from the Russians, and the Russians are going to attack the Ottomans to get the independence for Greece. Now, as soon as Russia attacks, France and Britain can't really take it, because they see that if Greece becomes pro-Russia, it will be problematic for the British and the French, and therefore the Russians' involvement in the Greek War of Independence will also pull the British and the French into this independence battle, where Britain and France will say, we will also give you independence. Why not Russia? We will also give you independence. We are also fighting for independence. Now, this is where Greece will be created as an independent country via the Treaty of Andronope in 1829, recognized by the great powers also, because first the Russians attacked the Sultan, then the British and the French attacked the Sultan because the Russians were involved, and thereafter Greece will be given their independence on a platter. And the platter was, Greece, take this independence, we Russians, Britain and French are giving it to you. Now, if you look at this event vis-a-vis what happened in Serbia and Greece, now this is where a very interesting tendency has arisen. Don't you think this is unfair for the Serbians? Because when it came to the Serbians, nobody came to the resistance. But because the Greeks are important, now everybody wanted to give them independence. And this is where there will be a interesting development in Serbia. Serbia or Serbians will start to hate Western European powers, and they will feel that they were not given assistance and therefore they were betrayed. And this is where Serbian nationalism, a very important point, please note this, this is one of the reasons for the First World War. Serbian nationalism was explicitly anti-West. That Britain, France did not help me. Slavs, Russians are our brothers, were not able to get involved. But why did Britain and France help me? And this is where the Greek independence will in a way send jitters through the Balkan sector. But one more tendency which needs to be noted, this is the first tendency. The second tendency which needs to be noted is that great powers were getting involved in localized events and further, local events or regional events were now becoming global. And this is a very, very important point. Please note these 3 points because this is extremely important to understand the First World War. Serbian nationalism is explicitly anti-West, but Greek and Serbian War of Independence shows us 2 things. First, that small issues, it's an Ottoman local issues. Imagine that the water crisis between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, America starts to give some form of resolution. It makes no sense. Same way, regional events within the Ottoman Empire are now getting global attention, and great powers are getting involved. They got involved in Ottoman politics to give Greece independence. If we understand these 3 tendencies, then I'll move to the next 3, which is quite interesting. I hope you're understanding why am I discussing these events. These events basically explain a lot of what happened in the First World War. So that is why I told you Sarajevo crisis cannot explain the First World War. You have to go back. You have to go back to the Eastern question and the very problematic answer which the Western European powers gave to the Eastern question itself. Serbia feels betrayed, anti-West relationship, anti-West feeling. Greece feels that it was given independence on a platter. But the point is, why are great powers getting involved in small issues? Why are they getting involved in issues related to the Ottoman Empire? They have no place to do that, but this is what is the tendency of 19th century in Europe. If we understand this, then I move to the Crimean War and the Great Eastern Crisis. Are we sorted with regards to these 2 events? These events in themselves are not important. Their implications are important. We've discussed the first set. I move to the next set. Are we on the same page? Okay, great, Aman. That is why you have to have an holistic understanding. I'll consolidate everything for you, but try to understand it like a story. No. Okay. Now, moving to the next issue. This is called the Crimean Peninsula. One of the most important sectors in 2014 also, once Russia took this sector because of Sevastopol. Now, the Crimean War is a very interesting war, and I'll tell you why. Crimean War was a war which was fought between nations which were actually on the same side. Now, within the Ottoman Empire, you have this sector, wherein you have the Palestinian sector, what is modern day Israel and modern day Palestine. There was a conflict which arose here. There were some Christians which needed to be pushed into the protection of a Christian nation. But these Christians were basically what are called as Orthodox Eastern European Christians. There are 2 types of Christians in the world other than Catholic and Protestant, but that is within the what we call as Roman Catholic Christianity. There's one more form of Christianity in the world which is called Eastern Orthodox Church. The protector of the Roman Catholic Church, out of which the Catholics and the Protestants came out, is France. France protects the Pope. On the other hand, there was one more Pope in the world, and that Pope sits in Russia. So, Eastern Orthodox Christianity exists in the Slavic nations in Russia, and Roman Catholic Christianity exists in Western Europe. Now, the question was, who should the Ottoman Emperor give control over these Christians? One option was to give it to the French, but these are Eastern Orthodox Christians. And the other option was to the Russians, who are basically Orthodox Christians, Orthodox Eastern Christians. Now, when we talk about this conflict, what happens is both the popes compromise. They compromise over the concept that some of these men and women will go under the French, you can say, protection, and some of them will go under Russian protection. Therefore, at the Pope level, they had compromised. However, the Tsar, who is the king of Russia, Tsar Nicholas I is going to get to know that there's a compromise which has been brought through the popes. And this is where Tsar Nicholas I will say to his pope, who told you to compromise? When these Ottomans were giving us the area, this land and the people, why did you compromise with France? This is where the Russian and the French rivalry comes through. And now Russia says, we want all this area, all these people. And Tsar Nicholas I is now going to send a letter to the Ottomans that you remove French from this sector, I will take control. And this is where the Ottomans will say, it's already a done deal. We've already allowed France to enter into this sector. And this is where the Crimean War crisis will start. When we talk about the Crimean War, it is all about the Palestinian Christian minorities. It's about who should have control over this sector, should the French or should the Russians. And in turn, the Ottoman Sultan will give control to the French. And this is where there is going to be a major crisis which is going to come through. And therefore, Russia will now choose to attack the Ottomans in 1853. And this is where the Crimean War will start. Now, why is the Crimean War important? I'll tell you why. Because this shows a new tendency in Europe. The fourth tendency, which is no compromise. Which is no compromise. The popes had sorted it out. However, Tsar Nicholas I did not want to compromise itself. The egos of the great power came through. And war was the only solution to all the crisis and issues. This is the fifth major tendency which rises, which is if you add the great powers getting involved in localized issues, if you have local events which are there, if you have Serbian nationalism which is anti-West, and thereafter you have no compromise and war as the only solution, Europe is becoming more and more problematic and more explosive. Because in the Crimean War, what is going to happen is, it is even more interesting. Ottomans will be attacked by Russia. Now, just to refresh our memory, Britain and France, did they attack Ottomans in the Greek War of Independence? Yes or no? Did they attack during the Greek War of Independence? Did Britain and France attack the Ottomans to give Greece independence? Yes or no? What is the answer to that question? And the answer to that question is yes. Yes. Once the Russians got involved, the British and the French attacked the Ottomans to take the Greek sector and give it to the Greek nationals. Now what is going to happen is, once Russia is going to attack Ottomans, Britain and France are now going to come to the assistance of the Russians. Once this war will start, at the Battle of Sinop, Russia is going to take the most of this sector. But the British and the French media and the nationals wanted Britain and France to get involved. And once Britain and France will get involved, thereafter the Ottomans will be supported by the British and the French. And this is where, as soon as Britain and France come into the picture, the Russians will retreat, and what will be signed is the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris, wherein both parties will come back to their original positions, but that will in turn lead to what is called as the demilitarization of the Black Sea. Basically, the British and the French will now basically say that you cannot have any military ship in the Black Sea, and this will be one of the biggest setbacks to Russia. One of the biggest setbacks to Russia, because Russia can now not use Sevastopol as a military zone. So, let me repeat. See, during the Greek War of Independence, Greeks were not getting independence alone. and therefore Russia intervened, Britain and France intervened because Russia intervened. This point is clear to you? Now, during the Crimean crisis, Russia will attack Ottomans. Because Russia attacked Ottomans, Ottomans cannot be killed, because if it will be, they will be killed. Russia gains the whole of Eastern European sector. Therefore, in order to balance Russia, the same powers which had attacked the Ottomans during the Greek War of Independence will now come to the assistance of the Ottomans so that the Ottomans can be kept alive. And as soon as the British and the French will enter the Crimean War, the Russians will have no chance and the parties will come back to their original positions via the Treaty of Paris. Antara and everybody, you have to understand one thing. There's a very important saying in world history. There are no permanent enemies and there are no permanent allies in the world politics. Meaning, it was shifting understanding. So, in Greek War of Independence, it was Britain, France, Russia versus Ottomans. On the other hand, in the Crimean War, it is Ottomans, British, France versus Russia. This is where only personal interest matters. This is how the Eastern question was being answered. Don't let the Ottomans die, balance Russia. And the Crimean War, in a way, was the first time, yes, the dual standards of the British came through. When it came to appeasing the Greeks, they fought with the same Ottomans. And when it came to protecting the Ottomans, they were fighting on Ottoman side. This is why I told you that the power politics of Europe was so messy that the First World War was actually nothing but a basic culmination of this whole crisis in that regard. So, when we talk about the three events which we discussed, the Serbian War of Independence, the Greek War of Independence, and the Crimean crisis, what we understand is that Serbia's nationalism is anti-West. Local events are becoming bigger and bigger and becoming global events. Great powers are getting involved in things they should not, which is in regional politics. War is the only solution and no compromise. Nicholas once said, I will lose this war, but I will still fight this war. Do we understand these 5 tendencies? Because then I go to the Great Eastern Crisis and thereafter we can move into the 1900s. Do you understand these 5 tendencies? And you understand the dualistic politics of the British, the French and the Russians, and therefore how they are basically playing out themselves in this whole sector. We understand this? Perfect. Now, the next crisis happens once the Balkan sector takes control of their own politics, which is Balkan sector was becoming more and more problematic, meaning the Serbian nationalism was already rising, Greece had already started to exist, Serbians had already started to exist. Now the question was, Ottomans were weak. By 1870s, a very important power had now come into existence, which is Germany, and Italy has also unified itself. So Italy has unified itself. On the other hand, the Germans have unified themselves. So now Germany and Italy come into existence in 1870-71. So by 1870-71, Germany and Italy are also into what we call as the world powers, and Germany emerges as a very important great power. Now all our actors are in place for the First World War. Now, during the 1870 to 78 period, the Russians now start to fuel nationalism in the Slavic sector. So the Russians go to the Serbians and say, ask for independence. Go to the Bulgarians and say, ask for independence. Goes to the Romanians and say, ask for independence. It is your right. Russians don't want to fight the Ottomans head on. The reason for that is what? Why does not Russia want to go head on with the Ottomans? What is the answer to that question? What is the answer to that question? Come on. You already know that. What is the answer to that question? Yes. France and Britain will get involved. If France and Britain will get involved, Russia will never have a chance. So what the Russians were doing was, they were basically encouraging this nationalism in the Balkan sector. That go ask. You always wanted, na? Go and ask for independence. This is where Russia was standing in the back. Now what will happen is, what will be formed is called the Balkan Pact. In the Balkan Pact, Romanians, Bulgarians, Serbians, and the Greeks will say, let's do one thing, let's kill the Ottomans and take this whole sector in our control. And Bulgaria plus Romania plus Serbia plus Greece will now attack the Ottomans. And as soon as the Ottomans retaliate, Russia says, how can you touch the Slavs? How can you touch, how? This is 1876-78 period. So basically, now the Ottomans say, we will take back this sector. Russia says, how can you touch the Slavs? How can you touch my people? And this is where Russia will get involved. And Russia will basically, in a way, in pretext of protecting the Balkan sector, now fight the Great Eastern Crisis War. Last time, what was the mistake Russia did was that they did not sign a treaty. Here what they will do is, they will very quickly enter into the war. They will encourage the revolts. And thereafter, they will also sign a treaty. And that treaty is called Treaty of San Stefano. So now Russia says, see, I helped the Balkan sector. This is the treaty which says all of this area is mine, and Treaty of San Stefano has happened. Now nobody is going to deny this to me. I have already signed a treaty. Everything is mine. Now the British and the French were hesitant to enter into this war because they had already said to the Ottomans that Russia is going to do this. There was a proper Constantinople conference which had happened, where the British and the French had given a little bit of heed to the Ottomans that Russia is fueling nationalism in the Bosnian sector, in the Herzegovinian sector, in the Bulgarian sector. Be wary of it. Ottoman said, I'll manage, don't worry. And now you have the Treaty of San Stefano which is being signed. Now this is where a very interesting thing happens. When the British and the French don't get involved, Germany gets involved. And now Bismarck is going to rise as a world leader, going to say, what is this Treaty of San Stefano and all? I don't see this crisis to be like this, because it was happening on the Austrian border. They wanted to make sure that this did not go out of hand. And now, rather than meeting at Paris as they had met during the Crimean War, for the first time in world politics, the Congress will happen at Berlin. And Berlin will emerge as a very important, what we call as capital now. And the Germans will now rise as a power. At the Congress of Berlin, all the great powers, Britain, France, Germany, Austria, Italy and Russia will come together. The 4 Balkan countries will be brought in: Greece, Serbia, Romania, Montenegro at this point of time. Thereafter, Bismarck will say, what is this Treaty of San Stefano and all? In 1878 you signed. What is this Treaty of San Stefano? We don't recognize it. Britain and France, do you recognize it? They said no. And Germany says, we also don't recognize it. So then what is this concept of Russia saying that I am going to take all of this sector, we are all together? And basically everything is taken away from Russia and given back to the Balkan sector and to the Ottomans. This is where there are 2 things which happen. See, Russia is humiliated twice. Within the span of 30 years, Russia has been humiliated twice. It has been humiliated in the Crimean War, where it was again asked to go back, and it is again been humiliated through the Treaty of San Stefano being annulled. So Russia now ceases to be a threat to the British and the French, because any day the British can fight with the Russians even with their one hand tied to their back. But what is more important is there rises a rivalry, and that rivalry is Germany versus England. See, the English are the foremost industrial power. They have control over India. They are now becoming more and more pronounced. The crown rule has been inaugurated in India itself. The empire on which the sun never set, the English were the most powerful at this point of time. But the Germans had now risen. The Congress had happened at Berlin, and Bismarck was now industrializing Germany very quickly. And Germany's output within 10 years was more than the British by 1880. And this is where there's a jealousy which rises, and a very important jealousy. That jealousy is that the English and the Germans, the English are jealous of the Germans. They are like, we allowed them to unify. Now, this same person is calling a Congress at Berlin, and at the same point of time, now they are also annulling a treaty with Russia. Further, he has more output than me within 10 years of existing. Now, one thing is these tendencies, but the Europeans are very bad at creating maps also. If you have to mess up a map, give it to a European. He will for sure mess it up like anything, and every war which happened further was because of the cartographic skills of a European. Now, I'll show you why the Congress of Berlin created the context for the First World War. This is the map which is created once the Congress of Berlin has actually come through. Now, what they do is, now pay attention, very interesting but very confusing also. They create Serbia. Serbia's independence has finally been recognized. Once Serbia's independence is recognized, they create something called Bulgaria. It is called Greater Bulgaria. This whole sector is called Bulgaria. Then they create one more entity which is called Romania, and they create a new area which is called Bosnia. Now pay attention to Bosnia. Now Bosnia, this sector is actually predominantly Serb, meaning most of them are Serbians. And Bosnia was a very important demand which the Serbians had at the 1878 Congress of Paris. The idea was that if you look at this map, do the Serbians have access to the Aegean Sea? Do the Serbians have the access to the Aegean Sea, Adriatic Sea, or the Mediterranean Sea? Do they have access to it? Yes or no? This is Serbia. This is Serbia. The answer to that question is what? No. They are a landlocked country, right? Now the Serbians said to the Germans and to the British, give us Bosnia. Please give us Bosnia. If you give us Bosnia, it is already Serbian. We will get access to the sea. We will get access to the sea. Please give us Bosnia. Now, the Austrians, who are now an ally of the Germans, say to the Germans, don't let the Serbians get access to the sea because they will become a nuisance in the Mediterranean Sea. So, the idea was, don't give Bosnia to Serbia. Don't give Bosnia to Serbia because Serbians are problematic. I know them. Don't let them. Germany will oblige, but they will create a very confusing system. And the confusing system was, Bosnia will be shown in Ottoman maps, but they will be controlled, this whole area will be controlled by Austrian Empire. Again, as one of you said, a khichdi, which is shown in Ottoman map, but controlled by the Austrians. Dualistic control. Same thing they did with Bulgaria also. Bulgaria was given independence, but also the Ottomans had control over Bulgaria. Meaning, Bulgaria is both controlled by the Ottomans and also not controlled by the Ottomans. And Bosnia is part of the Ottoman Empire but controlled by the Austrians. This is why I told you, this is where they are very bad at creating maps. So the Congress of Berlin of 1878, as much as it had messed up the politics of this sector, it also created a whole set of issues. Bosnia is part of the Austrian Empire also. It is part of the Ottomans also. Bulgaria is part of the Ottomans also. And it's also at the same point of time independent. This is where it has actually become a confusing situation. Now, let's consolidate. Let's consolidate. Between 1800 and 1878, there are 6 tendencies which have arisen in the what we call as European sector. Plus, there is one map which has also been created. If everybody is on the same page with me, I would now want to bring in the concept of the 6 tendencies and the map together. Are we on the same page? I want everybody's assertion here. Come on. Can I talk about this concept further? I want to consolidate now. Can I do that? Yes? Perfect. Okay. Now, the first tendency, and it's going to become even more illogical and in a way, it's tragedy, but it has something related to comedy related to it also. But the first thing which has developed is Serbian nationalism is based on anti-West feeling, and they want Bosnia. Now, this is basically where if you wake up a Serbian in the night, he will get up saying Bosnia, Bosnia, Bosnia. I did not clear the examination because we don't have Bosnia. I was not able to go to war because I do not have Bosnia. Anything and everything, a Serbian would say, once I have Bosnia, I will basically get the best heaven in this world. Everything in my life is problematic because I do not have Bosnia. This is called the rabid nationalism. This is called the rabid nationalism of Serbians. Rabid means it is rotten. Rotten that they drink, eat, sleep for Bosnia. Bosnia, Bosnia, Bosnia. I want to go to the sea. I want access to the sea. I do not have access to sea route. I don't have beach access. So therefore, Bosnia equals to moksha. Very well said. The idea was Bosnia is my target. Every Serbian, the dream is Bosnia. I want Bosnia. They are dying over Bosnia. Very important point to be noted. Second is that local events were getting global attention, and no regional issue remains within the region itself. This is where the example of this is the Greek War of Independence. Third is great powers are involving themselves in the local and regional politics. Again, something which basically is based on the Greek War of Independence, the Serbian War of Independence. Fourth is no compromise, which is nobody wants to compromise. And this brings us to the fifth, which is war is the solution. War is the solution for everything. Meaning, this is where the Crimean War comes into context, wherein what was the concept that if you have given some compromise to the Pope, I want it back. I don't want to compromise. The Nicholas I is a very good example of this. Sixth is Germany's rise as a global industrial power, and at the same time, Russia ceases to be the threat to Russia, to Britain and France. And if I add to this, the messed up map of Eastern Europe, I hope now you understand why I went through this whole process. Because by the turn of 1900, there is a whole concept where there is a lot of suspicion. There's a lot of issues which are lingering around in Europe at this given point of time. Do we understand these 6 to 7 tendencies and why this messed up map is a problem? Do we understand it? Because I want to enter the 20th century now and move towards the what we call as the First World War itself. Another set of events will happen, but each have their own important purposes. Are we on the same page here? Yes? Okay. Now, when we talk about this messed up map, between 1870 and 1900, one more system or thing starts to develop in Europe, which is called the alliance system, wherein a lot of secret alliances were happening between different nations. And therein lies a very interesting, you can say, power politics. Germany had now become an ally of Austria or the Austrian Empire. And on the other hand, we have Britain, France, and the Ottomans as of right now into a certain alliance. This is not a formal alliance, but Britain and France protect the Ottomans. And the idea is Germany and Austria feel that there is internal secret alliances which is happening. Serbia is a player in itself, and therefore by the turn of 1900 we have friction. We have England is Britain only. England is Britain only. By the end of 1800, there is rivalry between Britain and Germany. There is French problem with Germany over Alsace and Lorraine. That is a very fertile sector which the Germans took via the unification of Germany. Serbians want Bosnia. We know that Bosnia. And Austria feels threatened by Serbia because Bosnia technically is under the control of the Austrians. And therefore, more and more issues are developing. See, you would know this point that the more you suppress something, there will be more outburst. So what the great powers were doing were, they were trying to suppress nationalism in the European sector and the Eastern European sector. And now there is a burst of nationalism where the Bulgarians, the Romanians, the Croatians, the Serbians are now asking for their independent nations. But the Serbian problem was different, which is access to Bosnia. Now, as you all have agreed that you understand what is happening in 1900, now we enter into another set of events which in themselves are very, very significant. The details of these events are not important, but the impact is. The first is called the Moroccan crisis. It's called the Moroccan crisis of 1905 and 1906. What is the Moroccan crisis of 1905 and 1906? See, Germany was desperate for colonies. Germany, the Emperor Wilhelm II, they have come to the party in a very, very late scene, in the sense that Britain already had a set of colonies, France had a set of colonies, Portuguese have a set of colonies, the Spanish have a set of colonies, but the Germans don't have a set of colonies. And therefore, the Moroccan crisis is based on this German idea that we also should have influence over nations. Now, this is where there was a very interesting arrangement. The French used to dominate this African country of Morocco, and the British used to dominate over Egypt. There was no formalization of this colonization, but there was an understanding between Britain and France that Britain, you control Egypt, I will not say anything. France, you control Morocco, I will not say anything. There was a very standard agreement between the two. Now, if I'm the Moroccan Sultan, I will not like that the French are asserting power. So now the Moroccan Sultan goes to the Germans and says, please protect my sovereignty. And this is where Wilhelm II is going to come to Tangier. And from Tangier, he's going to have a proper procession in the whole city where he will say, I, German, you can say Chancellor and the Emperor, protect the integrity and sovereignty of your Sultan. We, the Germans, protect Morocco. That he's like my younger brother now. Nobody can touch the Moroccan sector. They are under the Germans. This is the Germans trying to assert power. Now, if you were the French, you would obviously not like this, that the Germans are talking about a sector which you control. And this is where, as soon as the Germans will go back to Germany, there will be an assertion of the French in Morocco, where the French will capture the police and the treasury. As soon as that happens, Germany will feel that the French are trying to undercut Germany itself. And this is where there will be a conference which will be held by the Germans, where they will say, Sultan is protected by me. But the French will do also a conference in which everybody will say, yes, Morocco is of the French. Now, if you are a German right now in 1905, 1906, you will feel humiliated. And the Moroccan crisis, two different crises happened, but it is very, very standard for us. The idea is that the Moroccan crisis says that the Germans have no control over Morocco and the French have. So the consequence of the Moroccan crisis is the humiliation of the Germans. This is where there was a diplomatic humiliation of the Germans, and therein what happens is that now Germany can't do anything. Morocco has gone into the hands of the French, and in front of everybody, when the Germans said that nobody can touch the Sultan, French came, took Morocco from their same sector itself. And this is where Germany will now start to feel humiliated. Germany will now start to also develop a little bit of anger. Do note this point that Germany has risen in 1870. By 1905, it is being humiliated by Britain and France. So, Britain and France now are humiliating Germany at the world stage. A point again to be noted. Now, if I go into 1906, in 1906, there will be a very interesting and unlikely alliance which will materialize by 1907, which is called the Britain-Russia alliance. If you have done Russian Revolution, you would know that Russia will go through what is called as the October Manifesto crisis, and what will come out is the October Manifesto, which will in turn lead to Russia to become a constitutional monarchy. And now, if you look at the map of Europe, and I'll show you the map of Europe, Britain and France are already one axis. Now, Britain and Russia have gone into a certain understanding by 1907. And if I bring in the concept of Russia and France, who is getting encircled in this whole concept? With Russia, Britain and France going into internal treaties, which is called the Triple Entente. Who is getting encircled in this map? If Britain, France, Russia actually come together, who is getting encircled? Very good. Germany. Germany was now feeling encircled, which is on its east, it has Russia, and on its west, it has Britain and France. And together, this creates a little bit of anxiety. So if I add Moroccan crisis and Britain-Russia alliance, what I get is that the Germans are humiliated, Plus, they are anxious. They feel threatened by this new form of alliance. And this will explain the behavior of Germany in multiple forms when it will come to the First World War. Now, we shift our focus away from the Germans to this sector. This is Bosnia. Now, Bosnia was under the Ottoman, you can say, map, but it was controlled by Austria-Hungary. Now, in 1908, the Austrians and the Ottomans will fight over Bosnia. One of the Ottoman sultans will say that what is this dualistic form of control? Therefore, the Ottomans will fight with the Austrian Empire, and this in turn will lead to what is called as the Bosnian crisis. When the Bosnian crisis will happen, Austria is going to win, and Austria-Hungary or Austro-Hungarian Empire will now have full control over Bosnia. Now, why is this Bosnian crisis important? It is important because previously the Serbians did not know who to hate. Should they hate the Ottomans? Should they hate the Austrians? Should they hate the West? But because they eat, sleep and drink Bosnia, now the Serbians have one enemy, and that is Austria. It is Austria which does not give access to Bosnia. So Bosnia, and now you have a target which the Serbians have. This will explain the Sarajevo crisis to some level. Thereafter, for 4 years, nothing is going to happen in Europe. But thereafter, there will be again the assertion of the Balkan sector. Again, in the Balkan sector, what is going to happen is Serbia, Bulgaria and Romania. If you remember, Bulgaria was shown in the Ottoman map, and this map had been messed up. In the Balkan Pact, again, the second Balkan Pact, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania and Greece will attack the Ottomans, saying that let's end this Ottoman control over the Balkan sector and let's take what we can take. This is where neither did Germany and neither did England want this to happen, because this would destabilize this whole sector. And for the last and the first time, both Britain and Germany will intervene in the First Balkan War, and this area will go to the Serbians. This is called Macedonia, very important for the Second Balkan War. But the Serbians got what they wanted, which is access to the sea. But once the Germans and the English will intervene, they will again make this sector sign a treaty. Now, Bosnia cannot be given to Serbia. That is straightforward. But now a new sector opens up. This is called Albania. Now, Serbia sends a message to the Germans. We will forget about Bosnia. We will forget nobody betrayed us. We will forget everything. Just give us Albania. If you give us Albania, we will then have access to the sea. Our wish of getting access to the sea will be sorted. We will never ask for Bosnia. Don't worry, we will never say anything. We will forget about Bosnia. Just give us Albania. Give us Albania and we'll be happy. But what happens is, again, the Austrians intervene and say to the Germans, don't give them access to the sea because they will become a nuisance. So rather than giving Albania to the Serbians, Albania will be created as a separate country altogether. And this is where the Serbians will now become even more angry. If you are a Serbian, think, you fought for independence, nobody came. You asked for Bosnia, nobody gave you independence, nobody gave you Bosnia. And when you asked for Albania, nobody gave you Albania also. So neither Albania is with you, neither Bosnia is with you, neither nobody is coming for assistance. And this is where the Serbian nationalism will become even more pronounced and even more angry towards the Austrians. Even more angry towards the Austrians. However, there was a certain crisis which will develop just within 1 year between Bulgaria and Serbia. This is called the First Balkan War. But over this issue, there will be the Second Balkan War. This is Second Balkan War, which is where Bulgaria and Serbia will fight over Macedonia. And the cumulative outcome is, here we have Albania created, and the Second Balkan War will be won by no one else but the Serbians. And now the Serbians think they can achieve anything. We will touch the sky. We wanted to take this sector. We were not given Albania. We were not given Bosnia. But see, we defeated Bulgaria. Basically, Serbia is now supercharged. It is extremely supercharged. It has won a war against the Bulgarians. And now they say, let's do one thing. Let's solve the crisis itself. Let's take Bosnia only. And it is in this context that the Black Hand, which is Serbian Bosnian nationals, will then say, let's end the issue, and Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian, will shoot the king-to-be Archduke Ferdinand and Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, which is now the capital of Bosnia. And this is where the First World War will start. This is where the First World War will start. But before going into how the war starts, I hope now you understand why I started with the Serbian War of Independence. Because the killing of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand was not a joke. It was not a chance thing. It was not a random thing. It had a long history. And that long history was, Serbians were never given assistance. Serbians were feeling betrayed. Serbians wanted Bosnia, never got it. Serbians wanted Albania, they never got it. And in the end, Bosnia was what they wanted. And in turn, the Serbians will do what is called as the Sarajevo crisis, which is at Sarajevo, a Gavrilo Princip is going to kill the next king and queen to be, and this will now trigger the war. Now, before I go into that section, I hope that this 1.5 hours of context gives you an understanding that this list is very, very important for you, because out of it, this is at play here, which is Serbian nationalism. Sarajevo crisis is not a random event which happens in 1914. It is a planned event of how the Albanian sector went out of the Serbians and Bosnia went out of the Serbian hands. Are we sorted with regards to this? Thereafter, there's a very comical, you can say, sequence of events which in turn will lead to the First World War to start. Are we sorted with regards to this? Everybody? Why the Sarajevo crisis has it's an interesting context. Cannot understand the First World War. Now you will see each of these tendencies will come to play. Each of these concepts will come into play very soon. Very soon. Now, let's understand how the war starts. Pay attention. It is extremely comical. Now, a Serbian has shot an Austrian king-to-be. Austria says, enough of this Serbia, Bosnia, let's end this issue. So therefore, Austria sends a message to the Serbians with an ultimatum. If the ultimatum is accepted by the Serbians, the Austrians will not attack Serbia. And if they don't, Austria will attack Serbia for sure. In that demand, Serbia was ready to accept all the demands, but one of the demands was, you will stop asking for Bosnia. But the Serbians say, you can take whatever you want to take. You can ask for anything you want. But we will never give up on Bosnia. Bosnia is our life. We will take this sector for sure, which is Bosnia. We will not give up this demand. We will fight for Bosnia till we are alive. And therefore, Austria as it is needed a pretext to fight with Serbia. And Serbia now gave that pretext, wherein now Austria will attack Serbia. Now pay attention. It is going to be a very interesting scene of events. Austria has attacked Serbia. Now, Serbia obviously does not have the capacity to take on Austria. So, Serbia sends a message to the Russians that when we were fighting for independence, we did not ask for your help. When we were fighting for the Bosnian sector, you did not help. When we were fighting for Albanian sector, you again did not help. However, today your younger brother is under attack from the Austrians. Now see, the Russians feel humiliated. Russians, as it is had in a way being humiliated throughout the 1800s, and they believe that this may be a good opportunity to make this sector their own. And ironically, the Russians had never accepted anything which the Serbians had ever asked for. However, now the Serbians will say to the Russians, please help us. Please help us. And against all the larger politics, Russia will now start to mobilize its army towards its western front. Russia will start to mobilize its army towards the western front. And then Austria will say that I attacked Serbia. Why is Russia mobilizing on their western front? Therein, Austria says to the German chancellor and king that the Russians are actually mobilizing on the western front. So the Germans say to the Russians, don't mobilize. If you will mobilize, this is the internal secret treaties at play. If you will mobilize, it will be an act of war. Russia says, I will still mobilize. I am helping my Slavic brothers. Now what is going to happen is, Germany is going to attack Russia. Germany is going to attack Russia. Who started the war? Serbia and Austria. Who attacked whom? Germany has now attacked Russia. Now, once Germany has attacked Russia, the French say that why are you getting involved in a war which is happening between Austria and Serbia? So Germany says, I already hated you and I don't like your face. And the Germans are going to then attack France via Belgium. Not this sector. This is the Alsace and Lorraine sector called the Maginot Line. They will not go through there. They will go via Belgium because that is a sector which is mostly open between France and Belgium. Now, as soon as the Germans will enter Belgium, Belgium had a secret alliance with Britain that if something happens to Belgium, Britain will help the Belgians. Germany did not know this. Now, as soon as the Germans will enter into France, now the British will attack the Germans, saying that how did you breach Belgium neutrality? And therefore, a war which was in turn, one of you asked me, started by Ferdinand's death. Now Germany is fighting on two fronts. It is fighting with Russia on the eastern front. It is fighting with France and Belgium and the British on the western front. Ironically, it is the Serbians who started the war, but who is fighting the war on two fronts? Germany. Now you will say, sir, why did you then teach us the tendencies? I'll tell you, in this whole scene, all the tendencies are at play. First is Serbian rabid nationalism, that in turn leads to the Sarajevo crisis. Second is Germans feel humiliated. Germans feel very, very anxious. Therefore, that explains the German response to what Russia was doing. Russia ceased to be a threat. It wanted to assert power. Therefore, Russia did what it did. Secret alliances were at play. Nobody wanted to compromise and everybody wanted war. And further, a small issue between Austria and Serbia now has the whole continent fighting against one another. And this is where the First World War was actually not started just because of a death of Franz Ferdinand. It was because of the tendencies which were brewing up since the 1800s. Now, there's a very interesting way to understand this. I have a very interesting analogy for this, and you will always always remember how this war started. And the analogy is very simple. I'll give you that analogy. Imagine that there's a bar. In this bar, there is Russia and its younger brother Serbia in one corner. There is Britain and its younger brother Belgium in the corner. It then has France, and it has one very notorious kid called Serbia. Serbia wants the toy called Bosnia, and that toy is actually held by the Austrians, right? Now what happens is that the Serbians go to the Austrians, slap the Austrians, and try to take Bosnia, right? Now, basically, Austria and Serbia are fighting. Children, small players, not a very big thing. But as soon as Serbia starts to get battered, it says to Russia, help me. You are my bigger brother, help me. And thereafter, now Russia starts to mobilize its army. That how will you touch my younger brother Serbia? How did you touch my younger brother Serbia? So now, as soon as Austria sees Russia doing mobilization, it says to its bigger brother Germany, see what Russia is doing. Now basically what is happening is Austria and Serbia are standing in the corner, and Germany and Russia are now talking to one another. Germany and Russia says, you have to stop mobilization or I will hit you. Now what happens is Russia says, I will not stop mobilization. So now there's a punch which goes from Germany to Russia. Strong punch. So France, standing in the corner, says, brother, why are you fighting? This was a war between these two small children over Bosnia. Let them fight over Bosnia. So Germany says, I don't like your face. And now Germany goes to hit France. But unfortunately, there was a small child called Belgium eating ice cream sitting in the corner. When the Germans go for that punch, first they hit the Belgium and then they hit the French. And as soon as the Belgians are hit, the British say, how did you hit my younger brother? And therefore, now Germany is fighting France, Britain, and Russia at the same point of time, whilst the Austrians and the Serbians are standing in the corner waiting for this war to end. This is basically the First World War. This is how the First World War actually started, which is Austria attacking Serbia, Serbia saying to Russia, Russia mobilizing on this front, Germany attacking Russia, Germany then attacking France via Belgium, Britain attacking Germany. As of right now, Ottomans are not involved, Italy is not involved. So I hope now you will remember the First World War properly. Do you understand how the First World War started? Because now I want to consolidate the concept of the causes and then move to the course. Course is not important for the examination, but equally interesting that way. Yes? Are we sorted with regards to this? Clear? Everyone? Come on, I want everybody's assertion, then I move forward. Perfect. We'll do for Second World War also. Right now, let's talk about Maginot Line. Is the line between, this is called the Maginot Line. Something very important for the Second World War. Okay. Now let's consolidate everything. So if there's a question which comes in the examination with regards to what are the causes of the First World War, then obviously you have to write about the tendencies. Tendencies, I hope, are sorted, which is Serbian rabid nationalism. No one attacked to Austria. No, because Germany was protecting Austria. UPSC lover, Germany was protecting Austria. I'll talk about how the war goes forward. As of right now, nobody at Austria. Germany wanted to protect Austria, which in turn led to that. Now, first was Serbian rabid nationalism. No compromise. And I hope you will integrate all of these points in the examination. Please integrate these points in the examination. This will give you an edge over anyone else who is writing an answer, because all of them are going to talk about Sarajevo crisis. you will talk about all of these points, in which you will also add the humiliation of the Germans and the Albanian crisis. That is where I have tried to be as comprehensive as possible so that you can understand this concept in the best way possible in that regard. Now, first is this tendencies. I hope you will integrate it. Thereafter, the alliance system of the what is called as the European sector was something again which did not work well, wherein only war was solution, secret alliances, too much anxiousness, too many threats to one another. Therefore, it increases suspicion. Rabid nationalism, rotten nationalism, as it is something which did not really work properly, which is the Serbians were wanting Bosnia, the French wanted Alsace and Lorraine. Italy also had a grudge with Austria over an area called Trino Trist. Remember this. This will help you understand how the Italians entered. And therefore, Serbians are the notorious one here. Basically, Serbians started this war and then stood at the corner and saw the whole world fight over it. Thereafter, the press also played an important role here because the press was extremely nationalist, which is they wanted to basically not allow their governments to be conciliatory. Meaning, if somebody wanted to compromise, the press used to say that our leaders are impotent. They should basically wear bangles and sit in the corner. So the idea was everybody wanted to fight. And the press used to say, fight, 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 fight. We don't want you to be conciliatory. It is about our national honor. So therefore, in Britain, in France, in Germany, in Russia, in Austria, everybody wanted to fight. And this is what the press also does, is instigate people. That is what was done, which is instigation of people at this point of time. Further, the rivalry between Britain and Germany is something which should also be taken into consideration. If you actually realize it, this whole war was not about Gavrilo Princip and Archduke Ferdinand. It was about Britain's jealousy towards the Germans. Basically, Germany had risen very quickly and therefore the British wanted to show the Germans their place. You will see that animosity in the Treaty of Versailles because the Treaty of Versailles will show you how badly the British wanted to keep the Germans down. Remember, this is a very interesting life lesson also. When in life you will rise very quickly, people will become the Britain and the French and the Russians in your life. And what they will wait for is a moment like the First World War, wherein as soon as you will do something to either one of them, there will be a war and the Germans will suffer from 1914 till 1992. For 80 years, the Germans will pay for their arrogance, for their what we call as overreaction to something which happened at that given point of time. So never be instigated. That is why I say in class also, never be the Germany of 1914. Because people will instigate you. You have to make sure that you don't get involved. That is what the Germans did not do. The Germans miscalculated. The Germans thought that in turn this will lead to nothing but standard localized warfare. But they had forgot that localized warfare was never going to happen because local issues are becoming world issues. And therein the naval race between the Germans and the British, the economic rivalry between the Germans and the British was also very important. The British had introduced a specific type of ship. This is called a dreadnought ship. Previously, all the ships were made out of wood. However, the British were the first to introduce what are called as steel and iron made ships. They are called dreadnought ships, dreadnought class of ships. This changed naval warfare forever. And the British introduced dreadnought. So the Germans introduced the precursor of what is today called as submarines. That is called a U-boat. I'll show you. This is called a U-boat. This is called a U-boat. U-boats were the answer of the Germans to the dreadnought ships of the British. And there will be proper naval rivalry between these two nations. Further, one of the reasons why the First World War happened was that there were too many internal rivalries. Austria versus Serbia, Russian support to Serbia, German support to Austria, and there were a whole plethora of miscalculations. Austrians and Germans never thought that the Serbians will be supported by Russia. First miscalculation. Second, Germany never thought that this will become a world war, at least a European-based world war. Then Russia and Germany never thought that mobilization would mean war. And Germany also thought that Belgium neutrality will be ignored by Britain. But the reason why these miscalculations worked, the reason why all of this worked was only one thing. The tendencies did not allow these powers. The whole First World War could have been solved by one conference. Too many miscalculations, too many misunderstandings. One multilateral conference could have solved everything. But the reason why nobody came and went for conciliation was no compromise, and war is the only solution. I hope now you are capable of writing a very good answer for the causes of the war. That is where the real question and marks are. So are we sorted with regards to the causes of the war? Because then I'll move to the course. Very interesting, not very long, but very interesting that way. Are we sorted? Yes. Everybody's yes is important here, because then only we move forward. I've put in close to 2 hours to explain to you the causes. I hope this has been comprehensive enough for you, right? Okay. Now, I'll do that, civil servant, don't worry. Okay. Now the course of the war is very interesting. 1914, this war is basically between Britain, or I'll write England, France, and you have, one second, Russia and Austria plus Germany. This is basically the war, right? In 1914. So let's try to understand this through the maps, and then we'll go into the PPT, which has a nitty-gritty also. So in 1914, now pay attention, through maps I will summarize each of these years. In 1914, the course of the war cannot be written in 150 to 250 words, but interesting to understand, because Treaty of Versailles can only be understood if you understand the course. Okay. Now, in the 1914 period, there are two fronts, Western and Eastern. The Western front and the Eastern front. Now, when we talk about the Western front, though the Germans will be able to enter into France, as soon as the British will intervene, this front very quickly is going to become a stalemate. Stalemate means that neither of them can move forward or backward. And this is where the nature of war itself was problematic, which is called trench warfare. Trench warfare, I don't know if you've ever seen. Trenches are basically holes which are dug up into the land itself, and there are lines which they control. Basically, these are called the trench lines, and basically trench warfare is very slow warfare. You gain 100 meters, then you lose 50 meters. There's no man land between them. This line will become a trench warfare based line and will become a stalemate. Germany will have no success whatsoever in this sector, neither would the British and the French. So within 4 to 5 months, the Western front becomes a stalemate. Now, when we talk about the Eastern front is a little bit different. The Russians will very quickly enter into the German lines and the Austrian lines because they had already mobilized their army. But the Germans will be able to push back, the Russians, and will be able to help the Austrians to also push back the Russians. Eastern front, there will be a little bit of success to the Germans, and that is why Germany remained in a way involved and interested in this war. Here there is no point moving forward because nobody can move forward, but here Germans were able to at least enter into Russia. Little bit of success Germany had. So in 1914, Western front is already a straightforward stalemate. Eastern front, there is back and forth. Germans are feeling nice because they are winning small battles, good for their prestige. But this is not how this war is going to be won. You need further powers to get involved. This is where late 1914 and early 1915, two powers will enter. See, as of right now, France, United Kingdom and Russia are one bloc. On the other hand, Germany and Austria-Hungary is one bloc. Western front, nobody is going nowhere. Eastern front, back and forth. Now, France will go to Italy and say to Italy, if I remember correctly, you wanted Trinotrist area from Austria. So, Italy said, yes, I wanted Trinotrist area from Austria. So, Britain and France say, go, ask for it. We're already fighting. Why not get Trinotrist for you also? So, Italy is, in a way, added to the allied powers, and Italy is going to attack Austria. Italy is going to attack Austria over Trinotrist area. That give me Trinotrist area. So now basically it is Russia, France, United Kingdom and Italy. Now Germany needs to think quickly because this is now the southern front is also opened. So Russia goes to Germany goes to the Ottoman Empire and says to the Ottoman Empire, if I remember correctly, you hate the Russians. Ottoman says, yes, they have tried to destroy us multiple times. I hate the Russians. So the Germans say, okay, then join us. The party is only getting started. Join us. And I'm going to give you only one job. And that job is to make sure that the Russians don't cross the Dardanelles and go into the Mediterranean Sea. Only one job. Hold the Russians in the Black Sea. And now, by 1915 end, Ottomans are also in the war. And they joined the war because they have an affinity against Russia. That this is where German diplomacy comes through. That they say that you attack Russia when everybody is fighting, you also fight. Acha lagega, it will look nice. And therefore, Ottomans also enter into the war. And now we have two more powers added into the war, which is Ottomans on the side of the central powers, not the Axis powers, central powers. And on the other hand, we have the allied powers. We have Italy also getting involved. Now, territorial warfare had become useless by 1915 end. Nobody was going to win nothing in territorial warfare, which is that nobody was going nowhere here, nobody was going nowhere here. This is where by end of 1915, this battle is going to become naval. This is going to become naval warfare, wherein the dreadnought ships were playing a very important role. And now the Germans are going to reply via the U-boats. And this is where now things will start to mushroom. The reason was that Britain is going to block all the supplies of the German from the Baltic Sea and the Adriatic Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. Germany will respond. At this given point of time, the biggest profiteer of this war was no one else but the United States. United States or the USA had been supplying to the French, to the Italians and to the British, and now the war was now in the seas. Britain is going to send one message to the Japanese that seize all the German colonies, in this sector. Japanese will say, you would have asked me previously only, Japan was the only industrial nation in Asia. It will seize all the German colonies here so that the supply of goods from this sector would be blocked to the Germans. Now, what is going to happen is America was sending a lot of supplies on this area. So what the Germans will do is called the U-boat campaign. Under the U-boat campaign, the Germans will now start to attack any ship in this sector. Any ship in this sector, be it civilian or be it military, Germans will start what is called as U-boat campaign. And under U-boat campaign, Germans will attack this whole sector. What is going to now happen is Americans will now face casualties. Why? Because Some of these ships were, for example, Lusitania, for example, Sussex. Lusitania and Sussex are two ships which had some soldiers but mostly civilians. And the Germans will now start to attack the ships in this sector. And close to 1,800 Americans died in the U-boat campaigns, where even when there was a what we call as a carriage system, which is when there were two military ships with a supply ship, still the U-boat campaign was very successful against it. And now there will be rising pressure in America to enter the war. And this is the period of 1916-1917. 1916-1917, there is rising pressure on the Americans to enter the war because Germans are killing Americans. But 1917 April, something very significant will happen. There is already a stalemate in the whole of continental Europe. India is involved because it is a colony of Britain. It is fighting the Ottoman Empire. The Americans will enter the war on April 1917 because of this telegram. This telegram, which is encoded here, is called the Zimmermann. Is called the Zimmermann plan or telegram. Zimmermann was the foreign minister of Germany, and this was a telegram which was intersected between Germany and Mexico. If you translate this telegram, you will see a very interesting move which the Germans were doing. Germans said, Americans, you are being over smart because you are just suppliers. There is no war on your own soil. That is why you are liking supplying the British and the French. Let's do one thing. Let's export this war to the American continent also. And this is where, if you will read this Zimmermann telegram, you will see we intend to begin on the 1st of February unrestricted submarine warfare. This is the Germans saying to the Mexicans. We shall endeavor in spite of this to keep the United States of America neutral. In the event of this not succeeding, we make Mexico a proposal for alliance on the following basis. Make war together, make peace together, generous financial support, and an understanding on our part that Mexico is to reconquer Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The settlement in detail is left to you. You will be informed, you will inform the president or the above most secretly as soon as the outbreak of the war with the United States of America. And add suggestions that he should, on his own initiative, invade Japan to immediate adherence of the same. Please call the president's attention to our submarines now offer the prospect of compelling England in few months to make peace. Signed, Zimmermann. Basically, Zimmermann was suggesting Mexico to attack from the southern front of United States, saying you wanted Texas, you want Arizona, you want New Mexico, take it. As soon as the British receive this, they transmit it to the Americans, and now Woodrow Wilson will have no other choice but to enter the war. And in April 1917, the Americans will enter this war. But by December of 1917, something very unprecedented will happen in Russia. Russia will basically go through the Bolshevik Revolution. Lenin had now captured power along with Stalin. And in December of 1917, a long-standing demand of the Russian people was to exit the war. So the same year the Americans enter the war, 1917, the Russians exit the war, and by 1925, they will become what is called as the USSR. However, once the war, the Russians had exited and the US had entered, Germans had already made this war very difficult for them because they were fighting on two fronts. And once the fresh soldiers of the Americans are going to enter, within 3 to 4 months, by 1918, there was an armistice and Germany is going to surrender to France in a small carriage in France itself, and the war will be over. Therefore, 1917 is considered to be the most significant year in this war. 1914, it is Britain, France, Russia versus Austria and Germany. 1915, it is Britain, France, Russia, Italy versus Austria, Germany and the Ottomans. 1916, it remains the same. And thereafter, 1917, it is going to become Britain, France, USA, Italy versus Austria and Japan here also, Austria, Germany and the Ottomans. And by 1918, the Germans will lose this war itself, ending the First World War, which had now involved the whole world. Nobody could have not taken sides. So the Western Front, there is a stalemate after the Battle of Meran, where the Germans will be pushed back 20 kilometers, 20 miles away from Paris, and thereafter it will become a stalemate. On the Eastern Front in 1914, there will be German wins, and therefore that will keep the Germans interested. However, Turkey will enter this war and Italy will enter this war, and the Dardanelles Strait will become a very big problem. Russia will never be able to enter the Mediterranean Sea after that point, and this will be a major crisis for the Russians itself. And therefore, Russia will cease to be really a problem to the Germans by 1915, 1916. 1916, naval warfare is going to become very, very important. U-boat campaign will be started, and the US will now start to lose civilians in this whole process, which in turn will lead to the Germans to, in a way, retaliate of the Americans supplying the Allied powers. 1917, USA will enter the war because of the Zimmermann plan, and at the same point of time, Russia will exit because of the Russian Revolution. American citizens were dying, and the enticement of Mexico to attack USA was something which was considered a last straw. By 1918 November, Germany will surrender because its spring offensive was not what we call as successful. Allied powers were too powerful. Why did Germany lose this war in 1918 itself? Too many fronts for Germany, a better alliance for the Allied powers, the failure of the German submarine campaign in the Baltic and the Mediterranean Sea. Germany did not have really good allies also in that regard. Once the Americans enter, as it is, they were very fresh. Spanish flu is going to take a lot of toll of the German forces in different sectors. And in a way, Ottomans were already dead. Austrians were useless. Germany was only fighting on its own. So if we understand this, let's understand the war and then talk about Treaty of Versailles and end this conversation. Can we do that? Another 15-20 minutes I need from you. Are we sorted with regards to the course? This is the major concept, which is the changing configuration. Right? Okay. Now, if we analyze this war, you will realize that it started in Europe, then it mushroomed by 1917 the world. And this was unprecedented because previously this had never happened. 100 years war, 30 years war, never had happened that the whole world gets involved, and the only reason for that is colonialism. Colonialism is the single-handed reason why everybody got involved in this war, because these were colonial powers and imperialistic powers. Second, if we talk about the characteristics, this war is considered one of the bloodiest wars. And the reason for that is it took control over everything. The society, the industrial production, the fighting, anybody and everybody was considered a part of this war. New inventions will also happen. However, this is the real problem, which is previously there were ethics of war, wherein soldier kills soldier, civilians are not touched. But killing a German national was equal to killing a German soldier. This is a very dangerous tendency which develops in the First World War, wherein civilians and soldiers are considered same. That is why mass killing of people is considered good for your nation. And with no compromise on the horizon, it was very, very clear that the war itself was going to become extremely problematic. And if we look at the death toll, you will realize that the death toll of this war informally, on basic informal basis, goes to 3 crore people. 30 million, the official number is 8.5 million, but historians believe 30 million, 3 crore people died. And what you see here is total men mobilized and how many casualties were there. Green is how many people were mobilized, the whole bar, and then within that how many people died. Imagine that in Russia, 12 million, meaning 1.2 crore people were mobilized, out of which 90 lakh were dead or wounded. In Germany, that was close to 1 crore soldiers and close to 70 lakh people were dead. In Great Britain and including India, 30 lakh people were dead. In France, 60 lakh people or 50 lakh people were dead. And if you look at Austria, see the chart, out of 80 lakh soldiers, 70 lakh were dead. This is unprecedented. Unprecedented. Wars had happened previously because of the Industrial Revolution. This became one of the bloodiest wars in this century. Not the first one to happen, but Second World War was coming, which will kill 8 crore people. The idea was, this is where war changed forever for the world. This is why it's called the Great War. This is why it is called the First World War or a World War, because the casualty at this level is extremely big, and the political impact is extremely, you can say, significant, because Germany and Russia will have revolutions. Further, there will be the balance of power shifting. Treaty of Versailles will again create a messy map of Europe. I will show that to you. But one of the reasons for the rise of Hitler and Mussolini is actually the Treaty of Versailles, which was signed after the First World War, and the humiliation which these two countries will face. The whole world order will change. Japan will become a very important power. But if you look at the economic impact, that is where the real problem lies. USA was the only country which actually got something out of this war. $400 billion was considered to be the cost of this war. If you look at the pie charts, you will realize that the only chart which is going up, which is actually going up, is the United States. Everywhere else, be it population, be it GDP, be it debt, be it industrial production, be it inflation. Inflation went skyrocketed in Germany, but everywhere else, everything went up. That way, this war had a major cost to the Germans, to the British, to the French. That is where America is going to become the foremost industrial power, with now being profiteering and being the creditor of the world. This is where the power is shifting a little bit away from the European continent towards the United States of America. But this is where the cost lies. The social impact is people were disillusioned by God. Atheism, the concept that there is no God, now spread through Europe. Reconstruction was needed. Anti-war sentiment was very high. With 8.5 million people dead officially, it was very clear that this war was the unprecedented event which had happened in Europe. But the real consequence of this war is not that, but this, which is considered the worst treaty ever to be signed, and the single-handed reason, at least one of the major reasons for the Second World War to happen. So anybody who wants a Second World War video, you have to watch this video, because Treaty of Versailles is one of the reasons for that. Now, why is Treaty of Versailles considered the worst treaty? Firstly, Germany was not called to sign this treaty, even discuss this treaty. Basically, they were given the document, they were asked to sign. France said, let's kill Germany and we will never let them rise again. Britain said, if you will kill Germany, who will pay war reparation? War reparation is basically a money amount which is transferred from Germany to the winners for being the only reason why this war happened. Germany was given the war guilt, but Britain said, if we basically kill the Germans, who will pay for this war? And therefore, a compromise was brought in. Woodrow Wilson will give his 14 points. Then America will go into isolationism. But the clauses of this so-called peace conference was beyond exception. Germany will lose Alsace-Lorraine to France. North Schleswig will be given to Denmark. West Prussia and Poland will be now created free cities. Saar region will go under the League of Nations, one of the most useless organizations to be formed in the world. And other areas will be created through Belgium, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia. I will show you that. A union of Germany and Austria were never allowed. Anschluss was not allowed. German armament, which is navy and military, were limited. Only 1 lakh troops, plus demilitarization of the Rhineland. No tanks and only 6 battleships. But the real problem was this, the war guilt clause. I'm asking you this question after close to 2.5 hours of discussion. Was Germany single-handedly responsible for this war? You tell me. Because the Treaty of Versailles says that. Treaty of Versailles says that the Kaiser Wilhelm II was the one who was fully responsible for this war. And the answer to that question, as Rudra says, is no. Because it was all these tendencies together. Germany was responding to a lot of things. And it is Serbia which should have been given this understanding, rather than Germans being called single-handedly the most important factor in this whole concept itself. But where the League of Nations will fail is because the Second World War will happen. Germany and the USSR will not be a part of the League of Nations for a very long time. But where the Germans really felt humiliated was this. They were asked to pay 6,600 million pounds as war reparation to Britain, France, as for causing the war itself. This was unprecedented. 6,600 million pounds was not even the cost of the war at that given point of time, the amount which the Germans were going to pay. Germans were humiliated beyond exception, and the map which was created was fraught by problems itself. What the Treaty of Versailles, as I said, never give a map to a European because they will mess it up for sure. What did they do? They created Germany. Half of their eastern sector was given to Poland because USSR had left the war beforehand and Bolshevism was now a threat to capitalism. They took away the western portion of Russia and Poland was created. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland were created out of the USSR sector. USSR was made to, or rather was punished for leaving the war early. Thereafter, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Yugoslavia, where Serbia was now added with the Croatians and all, with Slovenians, and Hungary and Transylvania plus Romania was created. Now, basically, this is the first recipe for the Eastern European sector. Because what this does is, it opens up Eastern Europe for Hitler. Why? Because Hitler can now use these very nascent new states to usurp power once he will become very active in the 1933. Who created this map? The Treaty of Versailles created this map. The British and the Germans created this map. They created such a big problem in Europe that none of these countries had ever seen democracy. They had border disputes with one another. And all of this therefore creates a pretext for the Second World War. On this note, our story is over. We started at the Eastern question. From Eastern question, I've brought you till 1919. Ottomans created an issue. Ottomans were holding a dangerous sector. Nobody wanted to control that sector. Further, the Serbian War of Independence, the Greek War of Independence, the Great Eastern Crisis, the Crimean War, Moroccan Crisis, First, Second Balkan War, the Bosnian Crisis, and the Treaty Alliance System all together created a very big explosive situation with the 7 tendencies together with the rivalries and the messed up map of Europe 1878. It was no, you can say, surprise that once a small trigger came in the Sarajevo crisis, the whole world was fighting. And more than that, this was not the first time they are going to do it. The Second World War, the issues stem out of the First World War and the Treaty of Versailles and the British project to humiliate Germany beyond exception in that. So, on this note, I have been, as I said, everything about the First World War. I've been most comprehensive. I've tried to create the context for close to 2 hours. I hope that all of this now makes sense and you like the session. If you like the session, do subscribe to our channel, like this video itself, and also comment that do you want these type of videos. I've already done one on social reform movement. This is the second one which I'm doing on First World War. You can always suggest topics on which you want the one short video. These are videos which basically give you everything in that regard. And I hope that this effort and this 2.5 hours with me have been fruitful. So thank you, take care, and I'll see you tomorrow for CNA. If you have ever considered us for your guidance, use the code IS English and join us. Thank you, take care, bye-bye.